but also we're calling a Raise the Roof protest outside Leinster House at 6 o'clock on that day. For those of you that don't know, Raise the Roof is a trade union and civil society-led campaign. It's been in existence since 2017, 2018. They've been involved in a number of rallies and demonstrations, and this is the latest initiative. A formal launch of the rally will take place, headed by the Irish Congress of Trade Unions next week. I think the reason why we're doing this now is across the state in every constituency, there is a growing anger and growing frustration at a government that has completely abandoned communities, abandoned people in housing need, abandoned people in need of affordable childcare, abandoned people in need of vital supports for children with special needs or people accessing education or healthcare. And at the centre of all of that is an ever-deepening housing crisis. Rents are rising, house prices are rising, homelessness is rising. The government are missing all of their targets, in particular the social and affordable housing targets. And we want to make a very, very strong call to say that this government, this do-nothing government, is letting people down. And the only way we're going to tackle this crisis is with emergency action. We'll set out the detail of that the week in advance of the private member's motion. But we want the largest number of people who are angry and frustrated in the first instance with the government's failures on housing, but also any other issue that this government is failing on, and the list is very long. Come out, stand up to the government and show your demand for something different, in the first instance on housing, but also crucially on all of those other issues. Rory.
Yeah, it's a very, very important initiative today, what we're setting out Tuesday the 17th. We're really putting a call out to the public to join us, join Raise the Roof, the trade unions, the political opposition political parties who are here today, and making your voice heard. The housing crisis we've been talking about now has been hitting people for over a decade. We're 10 years. It's no longer a crisis. It's an absolute social catastrophe. It is a disaster. And unfortunately, what we've seen from the first 5 or 6 months from this government is not just the same, but actually worse. They have completely failed to treat this crisis like an emergency. We're seeing now they're talking about, and it appears about to be removed, the one protection that renters have in the middle of an emergency. They are completely taking us off a cliff in terms of commencements, in terms of planning permissions, and they seem completely obsessed with the private market, with institutional investor funds, and unable to find a way out of this disaster. And that's why this initiative is so important. We're coming together for the common motion we will be doing on Tuesday the 17th, and then also that evening outside the Dáil, a Raise the Roof protest. And Raise the Roof has organised a number of very large protests in years gone by. It hasn't organised anything in recent years in Dublin. This is a really important and significant initiative that we're coming together. I am being contacted constantly, and I know, as Owen mentioned and others will talk about, from across our own constituencies, from across this country, from young people, from people in their 40s, in their 50s, who are renting, who are stuck in their childhood bedrooms, who feel absolutely hopeless. And they feel completely misled by this government and abandoned by them, who claim that they turned the corner in the last election, when in actual fact all they do was driven us off a cliff in terms of housing. We need a new approach. Raise the Roof and ourselves have, across these opposition parties, have been setting it out for years. We need a shift in direction to emergency action and building social and affordable housing on a huge scale. Thanks. I'll hand over to Paul. Sorry, Marie. Sorry, apologies. Marie.
Well, look, I'm very glad to be here today, and I think it's important to say that the Raise the Roof campaign originally came out of the trade union movement, but there is a collective responsibility on the part of us as opposition parties to make sure that that housing is very firmly on the political agenda, and that's why it's important that we come together to have that joint motion on the 17th of June. The reality is the level of despair out there is absolutely incredible at this stage. I think a degree of fatalism that housing will not be fixed in this country, and it has to be, because we're losing a whole generation of people leaving the city and of course across the country, emigrating because they don't see a future here in Ireland, and we have to give people hope. The strategy of the government at the moment appears to be built on increasing the level of rent here, particularly here in Dublin, but of course across the country, in terms of inviting more institutional investors in. And every day we are seeing developers negotiate through the pages of our newspapers in terms of seeking cuts to VAT, greater tax breaks. there has to be more state investment, and I think that is what our four parties have been very clearly saying for a long period of time. But we know the government have been failing on every count, a sense that we're going backwards rather than forwards with regards to housing in this country, and that's why it's so important that we ensure that people come out for that Raise the Roof protest in June, because we have to make it very clear to government that we cannot continue as is, that we have to have a radical reset, a radical change in how we deliver housing for everybody in this country. Paul.
Sorry. In 2016, when we had the general election, you had just over 5,000 people in emergency accommodation. By the time of the 2020 general election, we were up to just over 10,000 people. And by the time of the general election just gone, we were at about 15,000 people in emergency accommodation. Over the course of that time, rents have doubled and house prices are at a record high. If we continue in the way we are going, by the time of the next general election, we will have well over 20,000 people in emergency accommodation in this country. Rents will have risen by another 40% or so, and house prices will be just so out of reach for ordinary people. And what we're saying to all those people who are stuck at home, in the family home, with no prospect of buying a house, people who are paying extraordinary amounts of rent with effectively nothing left at the end of the month, those people who are on horrific conditions in emergency accommodation, is we simply cannot wait until the next general election. We know what direction that this government is pointing in. It is a government for landlords, by landlords, for developers. Last week in the Dáil, Micheál Martin was defending the honour of vulture funds and saying they shouldn't be smeared or demeaned, and they have a very, very important role to play in our housing market. And literally the strategy of the government is to allow the crisis to get even worse, to allow rents to rise even further, even faster, all in the hope of, oh, this will attract in the private sector investment that will finally resolve this crisis. Like the strategy that they've been doing and failing for ordinary people for the past 10 years, they want to double down on and go even further, even faster. So we cannot wait until the next general election. We need all those people who are affected by the housing crisis to come together, like the political parties are coming together, like the trade unions are coming together, in a massive show of people power to put pressure on the government for a radical change of direction. We need to declare a housing emergency, and we need to act as if there's a housing emergency. And that means pivoting away from reliance on the private sector, reliance on the market to deliver housing, and instead for a much, much greater role of the state. So that's why we want people to come out at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 17th of June, outside the Dáil, and to send a very, very clear message to this government.
And folks, just to say, we'll take a few questions, but we have some boards. So immediately afterwards, we're just going to pop outside to the left if people want to take some images with us on the very exciting boards that we have prepared. Questions, folks?
Owen, can I ask you about the prospect of changes to the rent pressure zones? What can the opposition do as a joint entity if the government decides and the cabinet decides in the next week or two that they are going to be changed? And then separately, Marie, can I ask you just for comment on what emerged yesterday in the Sunday Times with your health spokesperson had on about patients in CHI potentially being redirected from waiting lists to a private waiting list?
So any move by government to allow landlords to increase the rent burden on tenants, a rent burden that is already far too high, will be strongly resisted, not just by our political parties here and the Raise the Roof movement, but I think by thousands and thousands of people. Industry is looking for the caps to be raised, they're looking for the caps to be waived in between tenancies, and they're also looking for the caps not to apply not just to new rental stock, but new rental stock over a period of time. The consequence of that will be, at a time when average rents are already over €2,000 a month, for rents to spiral ever upwards. It is not acceptable. Certainly for Sinn Féin's part, we will oppose it and resist it tooth and nail. But I think one of the reasons why the Raise the Roof rally and the joint action by the Raise the Roof political parties on the 17th is so important is because we want to give people an opportunity to get out and make it very, very clear ever rising rents and house prices is not acceptable. Ever rising homelessness is not acceptable. Failing to meet crucial social and affordable housing targets is not acceptable. And therefore, just as we've done in the past with the likes of Rights to Water, we will put pressure inside the Oireachtas and out to force the government to stand by renters and not heap extra pressure on them. And that's going to be one of the key elements of the joint action on the 17th.
Can you just come in on that as well, just before you come in? Just on the rent caps, I want to just back up what Owen is saying, and just to reiterate what I said in the Week in Politics yesterday. We will be actively and vociferously opposing any attempt to lift rents in the middle of an emergency. I used the word fireworks on the Week in Politics yesterday, and I think we need, in the opposition, to actively, within the institutions, within the Dáil, within the committees, absolutely oppose any attempt to remove those rent caps, because it is just unthinkable that this government would remove that few protection that renters have in the middle of an emergency. So just to make that.
Louise, I'm more than happy to take questions on CHI, but if it's okay, we'll take questions on the raised roof first, and then I'm happy to take them afterwards, if that's okay.
Do you mind just sharing more details on what this motion might look like, even some of the pillars and what you're working on at the minute?
No. Just to let you know, so obviously because the situation is evolving, we will publish the PMB a few days before this, probably the end of the week before. What we're here today is, first of all, to launch the joint initiative and the protest that will take place outside. The details of that will be worked out this week and next. It'll be broadly in line with where we've been before, but also the kind of comments here. But come back the week before the 17th and we'll give you a copy.
Owen and Rory, maybe Keir Starmer in the UK has said developers will face fines now if they're not building houses quick enough. Is that something that would work here?
Well, I think that we have to look at why developers aren't building, because we know, I think part of the fundamental policy flaw in governments over the last 20 years has been this complete over-reliance on private developers to deliver housing, and this assumption that if there's a housing need, private developers will build. So I think there is a need to look at, if developers aren't building, why aren't they building? We know, for example, there's in the region of 80,000 planning permissions outstanding, even higher than that actually, when we know that there's so much need of housing. The market delivers what is profitable, and there is an issue around that, and that is part of why this huge push on rent caps is happening, because they want to make more profit out of it. I think we do need to look at areas where, and the Social Democrats actually put a motion forward in the last bill forward to have an open book around developers and the profits they're making. So I think developers do need to be accountable, but ultimately it does come back to the state and delivering social and affordable housing, which, when you're asked about the motion, is going to be at the core of that as well, in terms of what Raise the Roof is demanding for a very, very significant increase in state delivery of social and affordable housing.
And just to add to that, let's not forget last year, the people who missed their targets by the largest margin were the government. They missed their social new build target by 15%, their affordable cost rental by 16%, their affordable purchase target by an astonishing 61%. And in fact, many of those so-called affordable rental or purchase units weren't affordable. So our biggest problem right now is the state is not investing enough or delivering social affordable rental and affordable purchase homes fast enough. And then on the private sector side, on the one hand, we need, one, to support the small and medium-sized business builder-developer sector, more good quality homes built for people to buy at more moderated prices, particularly outside of Dublin and the commuter belt. And that means government making the right kinds of policy interventions in terms of the cost of finance, in terms of the speed of planning decisions, in terms of site servicing. But also where there are landowners speculatively sitting on vacant properties or on sites with planning permission, not using them, then the state has to start getting tough. And we set out in our alternative housing plan how you do that. The people who want to build good quality homes in the public and private sector need to be supported. But the people who are speculatively sitting on huge volumes of vacancy and large numbers of sites, in some cases with services and planning permission and not developing them out, need to hear from government what they're going to do. I think there's much more effective ways than fine, like the use of planning permissions, etc. But in the first instance, the biggest offender here is the state. Only less than 8,000 new build social homes and only 2,500 affordable homes delivered last year, many of which aren't affordable. That's where the focus needs to be in the first instance.
I just to add to that as well, I think we spent a lot of time last summer debating the role of the planning system and government effectively blaming the planning system and quote-unquote objectors for slow house building. But of course the reality is actually something very different. We know that An Bord Pleanála has actually very much got its act together, but more importantly, Richard Humphreys this morning, highlighting that it's actually developers coming to the courts contesting, judicially reviewing planning proposals they brought forward themselves that have been rejected. And I think the reality here is that we have seen a constant attempt, a constant deflection by government for their own, away from their own failures, when the reality is that we do need to be supporting small and medium house builders out there to build. We do need to get serious in terms of the absolute dereliction and the land banks that are sitting around this city that have been undeveloped. And of course we know that the vacant homes tax and the derelict site levy are not worth the paper they're written on, because the government has effectively set them up to fail. They expect to make so little money from them. And so the reality here is that we have to get real about what is to blame, who is to blame for the lack of housing in this country, and away from the deflection that the government has been trying to, I suppose, manoeuvre and engineer over the last 12 months.
Okay, folks, we're going to go outside with the boards if you want to come with us.
Can I just clarify something here? So the motion's on Tuesday the 17th.
Yes.
You're calling on people to protest outside the Dáil.
6 p.m. Yeah.
6 p.m.
You don't know what's in the motion yet.
We do, and we'll announce it to you the week beforehand. Don't worry.
This is the teaser today.
Before you
Yes,
go.
yeah, perfect.
And
Yeah,
Paul
sorry.
as well, actually, if you
Yeah.
wanted to.
Yeah.
Go your question
Do the
again.
double
You go
act
first.
call.
Yeah.
CHI and the idea in the Sunday Times that a hospital consultant was moving people to a private waiting list, and that in some cases could have actually ended up delaying children's care. That report.
Well, look, I think we've seen a stunning set of revelations yesterday, and a catalogue of failure with regards to clinical governance and oversight. To think that a surgeon may have delayed the timely access to care for children is simply unforgivable. That there may have been an abuse of national purchase treatment funds, and also crucially that the Department of Health and the HSE appear to have been in the dark with regards to this inquiry dating back to 2021. So I think there are fundamental questions now that we now need to hear with regards to: has that surgeon been reported to the Medical Council? Has the NTPF had any knowledge that there's a potential misuse of those funds? And I suppose crucially, what is Children's Hospital Ireland? Because the reality is that we have had revelation after revelation, crisis after crisis, and I think the Minister needs to go much further than the moves, the very welcome moves she made over the weekend, but go much further now and ensure that CHI comes under the direct operation and care of the HSE, and that we end this constant drip feed of crisis and drama, because it is frankly so damaging to the confidence in CHI, but also to the staff who are doing, many of whom are doing excellent work day in, day out, but whose morale is on the floor because of this drip feed of crisis.
Just to add, I agree with all that. I have correspondence indicating that CHI is not intending to do a full review of all the children who had hip dysplasia operations in Temple Street and in Kappa. Instead, they're going to effectively wait for parents to come and look for these reviews. That is completely unacceptable. We need to have full reviews of every single surgery that took place, hip dysplasia surgeries, in Temple Street and in Kappa, and it needs to go back all the way to the point that the surgeons who are involved and who have been identified as having significantly higher rates of effectively unnecessary surgeries, to the point at which they started doing these surgeries. I mean, parents, families cannot be expected to come and go looking for these things. The state has a responsibility. We've uncovered a massive scandal of huge amounts of unnecessary surgeries, and now we need to go through all of the surgeries and say, was this necessary, was this unnecessary, and parents, families need to be fully involved.